All right, well, it's straight up noon, so I'd like to welcome everyone to our final episode of the Sterling Council's 2025 Summer Learning Series. And as mentioned before, my name is Laura McNeil. I'll be your host. Last week, unfortunately, I wasn't with you all, but Dr. Golston took us through a deep dive of organizational maturity as is reflected in scoring an organization on their approach to adopting ADLI and LETC. This week, we have Roland Martinez back with us today, and he'll be doing a quick wrap-up summary of all of the learnings that we've had in regard to ADLI and LETC. And then once he's done, we'll quickly transition into a Q&A panelist discussion with all of our presenters. I do want to let everyone know I have prepared some questions, and I'm happy to go through those, but this is all about you and your learning, and I'd really like to invite you all to enter any questions you may have while we're talking or even during the discussion into the chat, because we'd like to source the questions from the chat window first to ensure everyone is, has an opportunity to reach out to the panelists and engage them in their conversations. So if you are ready, Roland. And
ready as I'm going to be.
Okay. And Ashley, if you could bring up the last, our slide wrapping it up. I'll turn it over to you, Roland, and you can walk us through some of the highlights.
Sure. So hello, everyone. And, Laura, it's amazing. We're through, we're at the end of another learning series. We start these things out and it seems like a big uphill trudge, to be able to get them to the end. And then we find ourselves at the end all of a sudden. And that's kind of cool, with regards to that. So, okay. So, we've gone through, now we've gone, this is a 6th session. We've gone through 5 sessions being able to talk about ADLI and LETC. And really kind of giving those examples from a restaurant perspective, because it's something that we all thought that everybody could kind of relate to. And so in keeping with that restaurant analogy, you look at the criteria, and the criteria has, upwards of 200 questions in it, an extraordinarily complex view of an organization. But when you really think about everything, you can distill everything that you have to do in the criteria down to ADLI and LETC with regards to how you implement that criteria in your organization, what approaches you take, how do you know you're doing well. So ADLI and LETC is really the secret sauce that Sterling has with regards to how you view your organization, how you evaluate it, how do you assure that you're getting done the things that you need to get done. And so we got this great slide on the screen for those of you who play Scrabble. I can't spell. I spell knife with an N, and so I don't play Scrabble. It's not one of the things that I do. But this is a great way of kind of putting it out with regards to what we deal with ADLI. All right. So ADLI is approach, deployment, learning, and integration. It really deals with process in an organization. How are you? What are the approaches that you're taking? What's step 1, step 2, step 3 with regards to how you're dealing with those issues that you want to do, or those things that you want to accomplish. So what's your approach? How is it deployed throughout your organization? Who uses it? How systematically is it utilized? How are your customers, informed? How are your stakeholders informed about what it is that you want to do? I'm going to leave learning for a moment and run over into integration, which is really about, kind of what I've always said, which is a barrel of monkeys approach. If you played with those as a kid. And, if you pick up a process inside of the organization, do other processes come with it? Are they interrelated in order to produce the work that you want to produce? And then coming back to the L, right? The L is really about learning. And how do you do that? How do you know you're doing well? And it kind of leads us into LETC. It leads us into the area of how we are able to determine whether or not we're accomplishing what we need to accomplish. Because as managers, we can't really really observe every transaction that goes on in our organizations, and the complexity of those systems leads us to such that we need to have a comprehensive performance management system, a business results system, to be able to take care of that for us. And so the learning leads into Let's See, right? It's one of the things that it does, and it guides the improvement process. Without knowing what it is or how you've accomplished things, it's very difficult to make improvements over time. Learning is also improvement. So, and when we jump into Let's See, we're looking at the metrics. We're looking at the results that we want to achieve, right? And so, what are those levels that we've established? I think Anthony went through that extraordinarily well with his presentation on what those levels were and how they spell out and what's appropriate to really measure, to be able to deal with that. The trends that we establish over time. How do we compare ourselves? How do we look at our own selves and our own performance over time? Gives us the trends that we have, right? We look at that, how we doing better over last week, last month, last year. And then the comparisons, industry comparisons, places that do the same kinds of things that we do, or close to the same kinds of things that we do inside of our industry, even inside of our own organizations, that we can compare to ourselves for people that are doing similar things. But we can also use out of industry kind of comparisons where we're doing similar things that can be utilized for us. And I think one of the examples that was provided at some point was we can look at, hospitals, healthcare organizations can look at reservation systems and compare themselves to reservation systems in hotels, let's say, for instance, because that's kind of the same way that, it's very similar to what happens in hospitals with regards to regards to appointments or appointing or everything else. And so those comparisons, even out of industry, are critically important to understand whether you're achieving what it is that you want to achieve, and gives you a relative performance point to be able to compare yourself to. And then finally, again, integration. How do those metrics interweave with each other? And I think Anthony talked about, how do we segment that out? And that's where those integrations kind of start to happen inside of the organization. And how do we understand the interrelationships between the processes and how they affect each other? We talked about in the beginning of the series about using, what about the reservation system and how it affected table turnover or seat turnover, and how that was affecting all of the production systems in the kitchen, and how does that deal with that from a business standpoint, and making all of that happen in order to just get somebody the soup that they ordered in the timeframes that they wanted to do that. And so that's kind of what we've been talking about in a nutshell. And then, Samson in the end really kind of talks about, the scoring of it, right? How do we know, in using the score, what the level of maturity of these systems are, both Adley and Let's See, both process and results. How well are we doing with regards to what it is that we're doing in measuring the way that we put those systems together and how they address those issues? So that's everything in a nutshell. Now, it was interesting, I thought was one of the points that came up, was that it's not just, the scoring isn't just about your overall system, but it can be used to be able to measure the individual processes that you have going on in your system. So you can take it at a macro level, or you can take it to a micro level to be able to do those same kinds of things. And so the scalability of the scoring system is extraordinarily important as well. And so, understanding all of that, and understanding that not only is this to be able to look at existing processes that you may have in your organization, but also gives you a roadmap in developing new processes that you may have, to be able to introduce things, products, services that you've never had in your organization and you want to introduce. And so following this roadmap gives you the ability to do that. And so that's everything that I've got as far as a nutshell is concerned. In a nutshell, what we've kind of condensed over the last 6 weeks. So I hope that worked, Laura. Did that sound like it's about right, or is it just all clear?
No, spot on, Roland. Spot on. Great job. And actually, if I could, because I think you said this, but I just want to emphasize the integration to me is that magical moment. It's the integration of all of these things that we've talked about and that you summarize very, very well. When you have all of those things in place, approach, deployment, learning, you're looking at levels and trends and comparisons, and you take those things and you integrate them together and you have full alignment across your entire enterprise on what is keenly important through integration. That's where the magical moments occur. And I think you attested to that when you gave your COVID example in week one. And I
Mhm.
think you just kind of summarized all of that in your summary. It's that integration that brings it all together, which is why I is emphasized in both the Adley and the Let's See.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I mean, I kind of alluded to that with regards to just serving the soup, right? It's a very simple act in our analogies with regards to the restaurants, but all has to come together in order for you to get your soup at your table in the way that you wanted it, at the temperature that you wanted it. All of those systems have to be integrated in order to make that happen. And if any of those systems break down, you're just not going to get you're not going to get hot soup. I mean, unless you ordered gazpacho. But the truth is that most of your soups are hot. So you want to be able to serve hot food hot and cold food cold. And all those systems are all kind of put together to be able to and integrated, working together to be able to make that one thing happen for you to
Absolutely.
be able to have the experience that you want to have. So,
Absolutely. Well said. So what I'm going to do, Roland, is I'm going to kick us into a panelist discussion, and I'm going to
okay.
throw the first question out, and I'd like maybe for you to answer it,
Okay.
putting you on the spot.
Oh boy.
So I want you to complete my sentence. If
Sure.
someone only remembers one thing from this series, it should be fill in the blank. What would that one thing be?
Without a systematic approach, nothing else matters.
Like it.
I think
Systematic
that that's
approach.
it. I mean, that's where we all begin, right? Without a systematic approach, nothing else matters because then you're just doing stuff and you're never going to achieve what it is that you want to achieve, right? If you're just doing stuff and you don't know, and people don't know what they're supposed to do, and you don't know how it doesn't matter unless you have an approach. And so many organizations that I've looked at over the years, they just don't begin there. They do stuff and it's not really aligned to what it is that they want to try to accomplish. And so without a systematic approach, you end up with nothing.
Right. Good point. All right. So now the bar has been set. We're going to move over to Gordon. Gordon, fill in the blank. If someone only remembers one thing from this series, it should be fill in the blank.
Where to find the playlist for the series so they can watch it again. And Bob has put the link in chat, but we've only talked about 7 words, but we talked about them robustly. And you probably should watch this again to truly incorporate this into your day-to-day, year-to-year life.
Good. Good one. I love it. Nicole, what's your answer? If someone only remembers one thing from this series, it should be.
Um, Thanks, Laura. I would say that learning, 'cause I'm really passionate about the learning piece. Learning only becomes powerful when it's integrated. Without that integration, learning it'll remain fragmented and unsustainable. But with it, learning really is a driver of resilience. It's a driver of innovation and what we all want, which is long-term positive results. So learning only becomes powerful when it's integrated.
Very good. So we've got learning, we've got systems thinking, we've got rewatch the playlist, we've got learning. Anthony, what is your response? What is the one thing we should remember from this series?
Adley and Let's See is the language of systematic analysis. And it takes us off of that system thinking for you to really take a look at what you're doing. And once you learn the language, you can, really explore what you need to do and how to get better.
That's a good observation, absolutely. Dr. Golston, how would you answer that? Fill in the blank. If someone remembers only one thing, what would it be?
Think so. Everybody's been mentioning systematic. So as an industrial engineer, I think I would have to follow that kind of theme. But basically, if you could understand the Adley and the Let's See concepts, I think not only would it help your organization, but I think as Jeff mentioned in the video, it'll help your personal and professional growth as you'll be able to apply those tools in your career development.
Okay, very good. I have another question for everyone, but anyone can answer. What role does leadership play in the success of adopting Adley and Let's See criteria?
They have to be in on the ground floor, because if your leadership doesn't understand the language of it, you're not going to be able to speak to them about process improvement.
Yep, so the tone is set at the top,
Mhm.
is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and again, it's a communication tool. So if they're not, fluent in the communication ways, it's going to be, it's going to be hard to have that conversation.
Okay.
And they're gonna have to be the ones that's driving it. It has to be driven
Mhm.
from the top.
Absolutely.
They've got a,
Why do you
Mhm.
say that though? Why does it have to be driven from the top? Is it because of the structures that need to be put in place in order to support Adley and Let's See?
Exactly, because I think it's a comprehensive system. So if leadership is not the one that's the main drivers of it, it'll be difficult for the integration piece that you talked about to occur because people won't be as focused as they need to be.
Good
and
point.
in many cases, Laura, leaders are driving and setting the direction and the priorities, and leaders are in the position to remove barriers. So if leaders are really driving this, I think they're kind of the linchpin of the success because of their influence within their organization.
Yeah.
That's a really good point, Nicole, because it comes back to strategy, right? Corporate strategy. And in results, we look at levels, trends, and comparisons. And the integration component that Dr. Golston just called out is that integration back to the strategy so that we can ensure that we're achieving our mission, our vision, and aligning with our values on a day-to-day basis. Good point.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing, I mean, I'll take it even a step back from that, right? And so, if you look at organizations and you look at what leaders are really responsible for, the one thing, the fundamental thing that they do is that they set expectations, and in organizations, we have a name for that. It's called culture, right? The culture of the organization is what's expected. And without leaders being involved or on board with regards to this and clearly communicating what it is that's important to the organization to accomplish and what it is that they need to do and in the manner in which they expect that to be done, then the organization will grow its own culture. I think Peter Drucker was the one that said that the natural state of any organization is chaos and inefficiency. And without those leaders in place to be able to set the expectations of what needs to happen, then the organization will grow a culture, but it may not be one of performance. It may not be one that achieves what it needs to achieve. And so that clear communication, I think that's what everybody's summing up here, is that clear communication that comes from leadership and the manner in which they do it and the system that they use to be able to make that happen is absolutely critical to the success of the organization, and the fulfillment of the staff and the satisfaction of the customer groups. Without that, you've really got some work on your hands. That doesn't mean that the organization doesn't have to be involved at all levels, but it takes leaders to be able to do it. I've been part of organizations that have tried to do that from a grassroots level, and it is an extraordinarily difficult lift because leaders can veto activities and veto systems and veto, even improvement cycles. And so without them being on board, And without them driving the process, you could end up in a really dark place.
Yeah, that's a really good call out, Roland, because I look at it as though if there's not a cohesive culture that everyone is aligned to, it comes down to core values, and defining an organizational profile, what we want to be as one organization. You could potentially be spawning multiple cultures within your organization, which is not efficient or effective because they're arguing against each other, competing and fighting against each other. So that's why I made that comment about integration, defining magical moments. When you have an organization that's cohesively aligned, especially on a cultural basis, and in understanding what's important at any given moment on any given day, you have a better proclivity to develop and deliver role model responses. In a knee-jerk reaction, even in an emergency reaction, you then build trust that everyone will be aligned and reacting in the manner in which they should be because you have a cohesive culture. Yeah, there's no cancer in the organization fighting against the better good. No, that was a really good call out, Roland. Thank you. Thank you for all of the responses from the panelists, as well as Jeff Harris's comment about culture in the chat. So I'm going to spin off and do individual questions. And this time I'm going to call out Gordon because Gordon's been a little bit quiet lately. Gordon, your personal transformation story, when I was listening to it, was very powerful. How does adopting this particular framework with Adley and Letzi change how leaders think? How do you see that it changes leaders' thought patterns?
There's an old saying that managers work in the business and leaders work on the business. When you're using this vocabulary, when you're asking these questions, what is your approach? You are building the business, not micromanaging the business. You're asking the right questions consistently at the right level, driving learning, driving integration, driving comparisons. It makes you step back. It gives your team members room to apply all of their skills, but it keeps everything moving in the right direction in a very aligned and integrated way.
Very nice. Thank you for that, Gordon. Nicole, I'm going to put you on the spot this time. I don't know if you recall, but Anthony provided examples of segmentation to identify performance differences. And in doing so, he leveraged two personas. I believe it was Alice and Dan. Do you recall that? Good.
Yes.
And he was calling out high turnover versus low satisfaction, low turnover versus high satisfaction. So how does all of that relate to what you presented when you presented learning and integration?
Yeah, that was a great example that Anthony had on his module. So I know Alice, if I recall, was the server who was turning over tables very fast. You know, it felt very efficient, but her customer satisfaction was low. Versus Dan, who was the opposite, whose turnover rate was much lower, but had very high customer satisfaction. So when we think about that in terms of Adley, so the learning and the integration piece of it, you know, the first thing I think about is, you know, how do we understand, you know, where all things are equal, where all things are equal in that organization. Let's make sure Dan is not working in a totally different kind of segment with a totally different kind of customer. If all things are equal there, what's happening with Alice where she's got this high turnover? What's happening with Dan where he has this high customer satisfaction? And where is the business in terms of understanding that those differences and where they want to level set, there? How can we learn and extract from Alice her processes that are efficient, that can be then shared appropriately? And what can we learn from Dan in terms of his customer service? And that's creating some positive positive experiences. So, you know, is it that Alice is rushing people? Is it that Dan's spending too much time? But what can we learn behind that, and what does the organization want to build in terms of their standardized practices? So how can we apply those practices? Is there opportunities for cross training there? We talked about in my segment about individual learning versus organizational learning versus learning with Adley, right? So could there be some cross training opportunities there where Alice's efficiencies can be used as a best practice, and also Dan's great customer service can be used as a best practice. And then once we understand what that looks like, how can we standardize that across the system with all of the servers, right? Because that's that integration piece, right? How can we ensure that the learning is not isolated, but it's now maybe embedded into the restaurant's training and onboarding and orientation, the things that they're doing, so that their service delivery, so the impact to the organization can, you know, does that, the organization doesn't want to trade off here. They don't want to trade off speed versus satisfaction, but how can they build that into a balanced service model, right? So that it not only improves their customers' experience, the customers' loyalty, but also the revenue, right? You got to balance that. And it ensures consistency in the service quality. So over time, if we're using that learning through data observation, information sharing, and then integrating it, meaning that we're embedding it across all of our processes, our training, our hiring, our orientation, that's where that magic sauce, that secret sauce that Roland was talking about earlier, that's when those magic moments happen. That's what I got out of Anthony's example there.
Excellent. Appreciate that, Nicole. Yes, it does come down to understanding and you know, the learnings, and then inculcating that into your processes. Great answer. So Roger did submit a question. How do you insert a foothold for Adley and Let's if you are not top management and the cancer culture is already prevalent? Chaos and efficiency already run rampant. I would love for maybe Dr. Golston, or we haven't heard from Anthony yet. Either one of those, or Nicole, if you have a thought on that. This is a really good question. It's a difficult one to answer, but there is an answer.
I think I have. You need to be the counter cancer. You need to be the medicine in there. As it is, listen, it's really hard to argue with facts. It is possible, because, you know, those of us with families all know, it is perfectly possible to argue with facts when you're in the heat of the moment. But for the most part, when you bring the data and you bring the results, when I say results, I mean the results of the process, not necessarily like, you know, but you bring that data, you show what's happening. It's hard to argue. And unless somebody really cares more about their ego than they care about the success of the firm as a whole and the organization as a whole, they have to listen.
Yeah. I love the data. The data tells a story, Anthony. You're absolutely right, which is another reason why I wanted you to answer, Dr. Golston. But I think also you can start at a team-based level. And when leadership sees teams succeeding, because they're focusing on the data and they're not focusing on the noise outside of their team, all of a sudden the team becomes very successful and a role model in an organization that may not be at role model status. And that may also be a foothold. Do any of the other panelists have thoughts? Dr. Golston, did you have any thought?
I was just going to echo what Anthony said, but I think, Roger, one of the biggest things, half the battle is the question, right? So you've recognized a lot of things within that question. So now you can come up with a strategy. And I think that's what the framework helps us do, the Adley and the Let's See. Like Dr. McNeil was saying, was you can, at the team level, at the process level, if you're over a process or a department, just try to implement it in the span of control that you have. Realizing that the results won't be as impactful, but you can start to show within your unit that you're becoming, you know, higher performing, and you'll start to see the cultural change because you're using the data for those kinds of things. And then that may win over some of the other managers at your level, and then maybe even top management as they see you to become more performing, and definitely being able to show the data and proof of what's going on within your own team or own process or department.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Gulston. Anthony, I've got a question for you. What is one metric everyone should track?
That's a great one. And those of you who know me and maybe even heard from me today, you'll get when I say I'm going to turn this on its ear, and I'm going to say satisfaction. And when I say that, I don't mean any individual satisfaction. I mean satisfaction all around. What is your satisfaction with the outcomes you're having? What is the satisfaction with your bottom line? What is your customer satisfaction with what you're doing? What is your worker satisfaction with what you're doing? You have to look at it from that way. Do you know why? It's going to make you ask the next important question. It's going to make you dig deeper, because if you're not satisfied, you've got two choices. You deal with it, or you deal with it. Okay.
Mhm.
And there's two ways to do that. You deal with it and you swallow it and you just let it keep going, or you get down, you roll up your sleeves and you look for the next, piece and you deal with it. So again, and it goes each one of those things. If your customers are not satisfied, that means they're not buying. You're not seeing your products moving off the shelf. You're not seeing your services being utilized to their, the capacities. And from there you can find out, okay, why aren't they satisfied? What are their drivers? And you get into that next question. Okay, I'm not, happy with the returns I'm getting on, I'm not satisfied with the returns I'm getting on this. Okay, that makes you take a look at, okay, where maybe am I wasting money? Maybe I'm not, it's not something I want to do. It always asks you that next question. Is like, if I am not satisfied with what's coming out of this, I'll know what to ask. I'll know what to ask next, or I'll ask somebody to help me what to ask next.
Yeah, thank you for that, Anthony. All right, I see that we're over time, but I'm going to wrap it up with one last question to Samson. From a maturity perspective, what is the difference between an organization that succeeds with this framework versus one that struggles with the framework?
I think the one that struggles with the framework gets more focused on the maturity score or level itself, and not what information that is given them. So as we mentioned last week, we're scoring processes, not people, right? So if you can detach the score from the person or the process, and if you're on the lower end of the maturity, we shouldn't be thinking about maybe continuous improvement or learning, but maybe standardizing our processes, right? So being able to accept where the score is, and then identify what are the next actions that we should be doing to get to the next level, realizing that there's no magic bullets that's going to take me from, ad hoc processes to benchmark processes, right? We wish they were, but there aren't. But it's a journey, not a destination, right? So if they commit to the journey and understanding that it's going to be those small incremental steps, and every now and then we have innovation, but taking those small incremental steps and then being, committed to that journey, I think those are the ones that have the biggest success.
Yeah, it is a journey. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you to all the panelists. I appreciate all of your insights. We've gotten some good feedback in chat. To our audience, thank you so much for attending this summer learning series with us. It's been a delight to jump on a Wednesday and take a break from our normal busy, hectic work days to meet with you all and introduce ADLI, the concepts of ADLI and Let's See. Don't forget, in the chat, there is some additional information. If anyone on the call today has an interest in becoming an examiner, it really has been life engaging for me and career engaging for me. It's opened a lot of perspectives, and I absolutely love the video that Jeff Harris did in the beginning. So please take an opportunity out and take some time out of your day to go watch that if you missed it. And thank you once again.